Nobody clocks in expecting to end up owning anything. You certainly didn't. You make $14 an hour sitting in a glass box on the turnpike, taking dollar bills from strangers who never once look at your face. It is 6:20 in the morning. A woman in a delivery van hands you a $5, waits for her change, and drives off without a word, the way almost everyone does. 2 exits down the highway, a self-serve car wash is running its opening cycle on an empty bay, foam and water hitting concrete for nobody, because it's on a timer you set yourself last night from your phone. That wash cleared $11,000 last month. You know the number because you built the spreadsheet. Nobody in this toll booth, and nobody in the 11 other buildings you now own a piece of, has any idea, and you have spent 3 years making sure it stays exactly that way. Your supervisor thinks you're saving for a truck. Your sister thinks you're just bad at answering your phone on weekends. Neither of them is wrong exactly. They just don't know what the truck money actually turned into or where you really are on those weekends, standing in an empty parking lot at 6 in the morning, listening to a pressure washer cycle through its routine like it's the most normal thing in the world, because to you, by now, it is. This isn't a story about a shortcut, and it isn't a story about luck. It's a story about a toll booth attendant who kept asking one more question than he had to, and what happened over 3 ordinary years once he stopped assuming the answer belonged to somebody else. It starts with a woman named Denise, who ran the express lane 2 booths down from you on the overnight shift. She was 51, drove a 15-year-old pickup, and always smelled faintly of quarters and hand sanitizer. One slow Tuesday she mentioned, the same way she'd mentioned the weather, that she owned the self-serve wash-off exit 14, the rundown one with the cracked sign. You laughed, assuming she meant she used to work there. She said no, she owned it, had for 6 years, and it made her about $1,800 a month after the water bill and the vacuum repairs. You asked how a toll booth attendant ends up owning a car wash. She said the same way anybody ends up owning anything. She wanted it more than she wanted an excuse. She told you the wash wasn't even the interesting part. The interesting part was that she'd walked past that same cracked sign for 2 years before she ever asked who owned it, assuming, the way most people assume, that things like that belong to someone else, someone with more money or more luck or a different kind of life than the one she was living in a toll booth. It took her exactly 1 phone call to find out the owner was just a tired 60-year-old man who wanted out. Nobody had ever told her that most small businesses aren't guarded by anything except the assumption that they are. You couldn't stop thinking about the shape of it. A car wash doesn't need a boss standing over it. It doesn't call in sick. It just sits there, taking quarters and dollar bills the same way you do, except it keeps every one of them. You started driving past every self-serve wash on your route home, counting cars in the bays at different hours, doing rough math on napkins.
4 bays, $2 a cycle, even a slow one running 20 cycles a day was $40, times 30 days, was $1,200 a month, before you'd even touched the vacuums or the vending machine bolted to the wall.
The math kept coming out the same no matter how conservative you made the assumptions, and that was the part that actually scared you, because it meant the only thing standing between you and one of these was you. You started reading everything you could find about the actual business. Not the dream version, but the boring operational reality of it. Water reclamation costs, quarter machine jam rates, the difference between a self-serve bay and a full tunnel automatic, and how much more a tunnel wash costs to buy, and how much more it can also go wrong. Every question you answered produced 3 more, and instead of that discouraging you, it did the opposite. A business with this many small, learnable details felt less like a lottery ticket and more like a skill, and skills were the one thing you'd always trusted yourself to eventually get good at. You had $4,200 saved, most of it from 3 years of double shifts nobody else wanted. Denise didn't hand you a shortcut, only a phone number, and even that took 2 months of you asking before she gave it up, mostly because she wanted to see if you'd actually follow through or just talk about it the way most people talk about things they never do. She introduced you to the man who'd sold her wash, a retiring owner named Frank who had 6 of them scattered across 2 counties and was slowly selling off the ones too far from his house to bother checking on. His worst one, 4 bays, 1 broken vacuum, a leaking pressure hose, was listed for $9,000 with seller financing, $2,000 down, and the rest paid monthly over 3 years at almost no interest because Frank just wanted it gone. You put down every dollar you had except $600, signed a contract at his kitchen table, and drove home with keys to a car wash you had visited exactly twice. Frank's contract wasn't complicated. 4 pages, no lawyer on either side, just a monthly number, an interest rate low enough it barely counted as one, and a clause that said if you missed 2 payments in a row, the wash reverted back to him and you lost everything you'd put in. That clause kept you up more nights than the actual work did. But it also meant a 29-year-old toll booth attendant with a thin credit file and no business history could buy a business at all, something no bank in the county would have taken seriously at the time, seller financing being, as Frank put it, for people the banks haven't figured out yet. The first 6 months nearly broke you. The pressure hose failed again in week 2, an $1,100 repair you didn't have, so you fixed it yourself from a video badly twice before it held. You drove out before every toll shift to empty the coin boxes, and again after, on maybe 4 hours of sleep most nights. A regional wash chain tried to buy your location's lease out from under you for the land, which meant 3 sleepless weeks of phone calls to a landlord who barely knew you existed. You kept the lease. Revenue that first summer landed around $900 a month after expenses, barely more than a part-time job's worth of money for what felt like 2 full-time jobs' worth of exhaustion. There was a specific Tuesday in July, 96 degrees, the vacuum motor smoking, and the toll shift starting in 90 minutes, when you sat in your car in that parking lot and genuinely considered calling Frank to hand the keys back. You didn't. He drove to the parts store instead, bought a $40 capacitor, watched a repair video twice, and got the vacuum running again with 11 minutes to spare before your shift. Nobody teaches you that the difference between people who own things and people who don't is sometimes just whoever was willing to sit in a hot parking lot for 1 more hour than felt reasonable. The turn came in month 7, when you finally stopped doing everything yourself. You paid a local teenager $40 a week to check the vacuums and empty trash twice a week, which sounds small until you realize it bought back 6 hours of your life. You added the cheap card reader next to the coin slot, and cashless customers turned out to spend almost 30% more per visit than the ones counting quarters, because nobody thinks twice about tapping a card. By month 9, the wash was clearing $1,900 a month, more than double where it started, and you hadn't touched the price of a single wash cycle. You had just stopped bleeding money on things the system could handle instead of you. That lesson turned out to be worth more than any single repair you ever learned to do yourself. A business that depends entirely on you showing up is really just a second job wearing the business's clothes. The moment the wash could run a full week without you physically standing in it, checking the coin boxes, listening for a motor that sounded wrong, was the moment it actually started being an asset instead of a very demanding hobby. You wrote that distinction down in the same notebook you'd used for the original napkin math, because it felt like the kind of thing you'd want to remember the next time you were tempted to do everything yourself again. Frank called you 8 months later, ready to sell 2 more of his washes at once, a package deal because he didn't want to run 2 separate closings. You used the first washes on cash flow as proof of income and got a small business loan for the rest, something no bank would have touched when you were still just a toll booth attendant with a dream and a napkin. By year 2, you owned 4 locations. By year 3, 8, you learned to read a car wash from the parking lot before you even walked in, checking for standing water that meant a bad drain, counting cracks in the concrete that meant a resurface job was coming, learning that the vacuum revenue alone could sometimes justify a location, even if the wash bays broke even. None of it required a business degree. It required doing the same 3 or 4 things correctly over and over at a slightly larger scale each time. Each new purchase got a little less terrifying and a little more procedural. You built a simple checklist you ran before ever making an offer, drain condition, vacuum count, card reader or coins only, average daily car count estimated from 2 separate visits at different times of day, and asking price divided by trailing 12 months of profit if the seller would actually show you real numbers, which about half of them eventually would. Frank once told you the sellers who wouldn't show their numbers were usually hiding either a bad location or a bad number, and it was rarely worth the time finding out which. The closest call came at a regional owners meetup. Frank dragged you to a folding table conference room full of men twice your age talking about water reclamation systems. Your shift supervisor from the toll authority walked in halfway through, there for an unrelated reason entirely, some cousin who ran the caterer. You spent 45 minutes with your back angled toward the door, nursing a room temperature coffee, praying he wouldn't recognize you out of uniform in a room clearly full of car wash owners. He never did. But you drove home that night with your hands actually shaking on the wheel, and it was the first time you seriously asked yourself whether you could keep doing both jobs without one of them eventually finding out about the other. You thought about it for most of the drive past the exit where your first wash sat quiet and dark, and came to the same answer you'd come to a dozen times since Denise first mentioned a wash off exit 14. The toll booth wasn't a secret you were protecting out of shame. It was just the last quiet room in a life that had otherwise gotten loud, and you weren't ready to give it up just because the other half of your life had finally caught up to it. 12 locations now, 4 counties, 1 retired mechanic on payroll, and a route manager who checks each site twice a week so you don't have to. The toll booth still pays $14 an hour. Your car wash has cleared just under $94,000 in owner profit last year, after every loan payment, every water bill, every broken vacuum motor. You could quit the booth tomorrow. You haven't, and it isn't fear anymore, not really. It's routine, and it's cover. And if you're honest, some mornings the glass box is the only quiet 40 minutes you get before the rest of the day starts moving. Your route manager, a soft-spoken former mechanic named Priya, runs the actual day-to-day now, the site visits, the vendor calls, the small fires that used to be yours to put out at 2 in the morning. You still visit every location yourself once a month, not because you need to, but because walking a parking lot you own, checking a drain the way Frank once taught you to, is the closest thing you have left to the version of this that used to feel impossible. Denise retired last spring, sold her original wash to a young guy who used to deliver pizza on the same route you both once worked. You went to her retirement lunch and didn't say much, just watched her laugh with people who still think she spent 30 years taking tolls and nothing else. Somebody at that lunch asked what Denise was going to do now that she was finally free, and she said the truest thing you'd heard in months, that she'd been free for a while already, she just hadn't needed anyone to know it. You thought about that the whole drive home, past exit 14, past the wash you bought from Frank, with $4,200 in a shaking hand, past every location since, and understood for the first time that none of this was ever really about the money sitting in the accounts. It was about the exact moment you stopped needing the toll booth to be the whole story, even while you kept showing up for your shift the next morning like nothing had changed at all. Somewhere on your route home tonight, a wash you own is running an empty cycle for nobody, on a timer, making money in the dark the way it always does, whether you're watching or not. Nobody in that booth beside you has any idea what you're driving home to. That was always the whole point. Denise texts you sometimes, pictures of a garden she finally has time for, and once a photo of the pizza delivery guy standing proudly in front of what used to be her wash, grinning like a man who just found something he didn't know he was allowed to want. You wrote back one line. Tell him to check the drain before he checks anything else. It's the only advice that's ever actually mattered. It started with a woman, 2 booths over, mentioning a crack sign the same way she'd mentioned the weather, and you being tired enough or curious enough to actually ask a second question instead of laughing it off and going back to counting cars. Most people hear a story like Denise's and file it away as something that happened to someone else, a nice anecdote for a slow shift, and go right back to watching the same 11 screens. A few people go home and make one phone call. That's the entire difference. and it was always smaller and stranger and more available than anyone standing in a toll booth at 6 in the morning would ever guess. If this kind of quiet arithmetic is your kind of story, the subscribe button is right there, and it costs exactly nothing, which is the best price this channel knows. A new one arrives tomorrow. Same time, same desk, different machine.